Forced to marry a black American soldier, a Japanese prisoner of war, never imagined her life would change forever. The year is 1945. The war has ended, but the hatred hasn't. When a brave soldier steps between a brutal guard and a desperate woman, he pays the unthinkable price: a shotgun wedding by military order, 2 strangers, 2 enemies, 1 roof. But beneath her quiet obedience lies a mother's desperate secret, a son dying half a world away, touched by the shadow of America's most terrible weapon. As walls crumble between them, nature's fury strikes, washing away everything they've built. Then comes the sacrifice no one saw coming, a medal of valor exchanged for a one-way ticket across the ocean. The soldier waits, alone with his prayers, as seasons change and hope fades like sunset over cane fields. Then one morning, a ship appears on the horizon. But can love born from duty survive the wounds of war? Can enemies truly become family when the whole world stands against them? What happens when the heart chooses what duty commanded? Late September 1945 brought cooler winds to Oahu's shores. The war had ended, but the wounds were still fresh. Private Isaiah Carter stood at his post near the prisoner of war camp, watching the sun sink into the vast Pacific. At 29, Isaiah's dark face already showed lines of weariness, not just from the war, but from a lifetime of fighting battles both on and off the battlefield. The camp sat on a wind-swept stretch of coastline, wooden barracks lined up in neat rows behind barbed wire. The salty air made everything rust faster here. Isaiah thought it fitting. Everything about this place was wearing down, from the buildings to the spirits of those inside. As the sky turned purple, Isaiah pulled a wrinkled sheet of paper from his pocket. By lantern light, he continued the letter he'd been writing to his mama back in Georgia. "Dear Mama, the war is over, but it don't feel that way. I'm still guarding folks who were our enemies just weeks ago. Some of the men here, they still got rage burning in them. Can't say I blame them after what we seen, but Lord knows there's been enough hate already. The Japanese prisoners don't look like the monsters they told us about in training. They look tired, hungry, scared. Makes me wonder if the enemy soldiers saw us the same way. I miss your Sunday dinners. I miss the sound of the creek behind our house. When I close my eyes at night, I try to remember the smell of your peach cobbler cooling on the windowsill. Your loving son, Isaiah." He folded the letter and tucked it away as raindrops began to fall. The night watch would be wet and miserable, but Isaiah was used to discomfort. He pulled his collar up against the rain and said a quiet prayer for morning to come quickly. Dawn broke with the sound of whistles and shouted orders. Isaiah had just finished his shift and was heading to the mess hall when he saw the prisoners being marched out to clear debris from last night's storm. Palm fronds and branches littered the grounds, and high winds had damaged one of the guard towers. Among the line of prisoners, a woman caught his eye. She wore a tattered kimono, once bright with cherry blossoms, but now faded to dull pink. She was slender, with long black hair tied back, and moved with quiet dignity despite her circumstances. Isaiah guessed she was in her early 30s. As the prisoners worked, an older man collapsed suddenly, dropping his load of branches. The woman rushed to help him, cradling his head and offering her water ration. A white sergeant marched over, face red with anger. "Back in line!" he shouted, shoving the woman roughly. Without thinking, Isaiah stepped forward, placing himself between them. "Sir, he needs medical attention." The sergeant's eyes narrowed. "Step aside, Private." "With respect, sir, these folks are under our care according to—" "That's a warning, Carter. Don't make me write you up for sympathizing with the enemy." The sergeant spat on the ground and walked away, calling for medics to remove the old man. The woman looked up at Isaiah, her dark eyes wary but showing a flicker of something else. Perhaps gratitude. She bowed slightly before guards led her back to the line. That evening, Isaiah was summoned to the camp commander's office. a sparse room with maps covering the walls and a large American flag standing in the corner. Colonel Jenkins leaned forward at his desk. "Private Carter, I understand there was an incident today." "Sir, an elderly prisoner collapsed. I was concerned about—" "Your job is security, not welfare." Jenkins interrupted. "These people killed our boys at Pearl Harbor. They tortured our POWs in the Philippines. Your sympathy is misplaced." Isaiah stood at attention, eyes fixed on the wall behind the colonel. "Yes, sir. One more incident like today, and I'll have you transferred to kitchen duty. Dismissed." Thunder rolled across the sky as Isaiah made his way to his barracks. The rain had started again, turning the pathways to mud. By lantern light, he knelt beside his cot and closed his eyes. "Lord," he whispered, "guide me to do what's right, to see folks the way you see them, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." He paused, listening to the rain pound against the roof. "And Lord, if it ain't too much trouble, get me home soon." The next morning brought no relief from the rain. It poured down in sheets, soaking everything and everyone. Isaiah pulled his hat lower as he patrolled the perimeter, squinting through the downpour. Suddenly, shouts erupted near the eastern fence. Isaiah turned to see guards running, rifles raised. Through the curtain of rain, he spotted movement. 2 prisoners darting towards the forest beyond the camp. "Escape! We have runners!" A guard fired a warning shot. Isaiah ran toward the commotion, his boots splashing through puddles. As he reached the fence, he saw the woman in the faded kimono, the one he'd helped yesterday, running toward the escapees. "Stop her!" someone yelled. But Isaiah noticed something odd. She wasn't running away from the camp. She was running toward the men, waving her arms and shouting in Japanese. One of the escapees hesitated, turning back toward her. "She's helping them escape!" a guard shouted, raising his rifle. "Wait!" Isaiah called out, but his voice was lost in the chaos. The woman reached the first escapee and grabbed his arm, pulling him back toward the camp. He resisted, arguing frantically in Japanese. The second man continued running towards the tree line. A shot rang out. The man at the tree line fell. The woman screamed and dropped to her knees, still holding on to the first escapee. Guards surrounded them quickly, roughly dragging them back toward the camp. "She was trying to stop them," Isaiah said to the sergeant beside him. "She was pulling him back." The sergeant snorted. "Sure she was, Carter. You're seeing what you want to see." By sunset, rumors spread through the camp. The surviving escapee had confessed they were trying to reach a boat supposedly hidden along the coast. The woman, whose name Isaiah learned was Aiko Tanaka, was being held in isolation, accused of aiding the escape. Outside the colonel's office, Isaiah stood at attention, assigned to guard duty. Through the thin walls, he could hear the questioning inside. "You understand the penalty for aiding an escape attempt?" Colonel Jenkins's voice was cold. A translator repeated the question in Japanese, then relayed a soft response. "She says she was trying to stop them." The translator said, "She knew they would be shot." "A convenient story," Jenkins replied. "She'll be transferred to the military prison on the main island tomorrow. An example must be made." Isaiah's heart pounded. He'd seen her trying to pull the man back. Without thinking, he knocked on the door and entered. "Sir, I witnessed what happened," he said, removing his hat. "Miss Tanaka was trying to prevent the escape, not help it." The colonel's face darkened. "This isn't your concern, Private." "Sir, with respect, sending an innocent person to military prison when she tried to help us, it ain't right." "And what would you suggest, Carter?" Jenkins asked with a dangerous smile. Isaiah swallowed hard. "There must be another way, sir." The colonel looked at him for a long moment, then a slow, calculating smile spread across his face. "Then you take responsibility, Private Carter. You'll marry her by morning." Isaiah felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath him. Sir, you heard me. Marry her, take responsibility for her conduct, or she goes to military prison. Your choice, Private. Dawn broke grey, and still the next morning. Isaiah hadn't slept. The colonel's words echoed in his mind all night. Marriage to a prisoner of war, a woman he'd barely spoken to. It seemed impossible, yet the alternative was worse. He couldn't let her be punished for an act of courage. A tent had been set up near the center of the camp. Inside, several officers stood with bored expressions. A few prisoners had been brought to witness, their faces unreadable. The camp chaplain waited, Bible in hand, looking uncomfortable. Isaiah entered, wearing his cleanest uniform. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his collar. A side door opened, and 2 female guards escorted Aiko in. She wore the same tattered kimono, her hair pulled back neatly. Her face was a careful mask, eyes downcast. "Let's get this over with," Colonel Jenkins said from the front row. "I have reports to file." The chaplain cleared his throat and began reading verses about duty and obedience. Isaiah noticed he'd skipped all mentions of love. When the time came for vows, Isaiah spoke clearly, trying to put warmth in his voice. "I, Isaiah Carter, take you, Aiko Tanaka, to be my lawful wedded wife," he added quietly. "I promise to protect you as best I can." When it was Aiko's turn, the translator whispered to her. She kept her head lowered, barely whispering, "Hi." The translator confirmed. She says yes. "By the power vested in me and by military order, I pronounce you husband and wife," the chaplain said, closing his Bible quickly. No rings were exchanged. No kiss. Colonel Jenkins signed papers and handed copies to Isaiah. "She's your responsibility now, Private. You've been reassigned to guard duties near the infirmary where she'll work. Dismissed." As the small crowd dispersed, Isaiah could hear the whispers. "Can you believe he married a Jap? Poor judgment. She'll probably stab him in his sleep." Isaiah led Aiko towards the small hut they'd been assigned at the edge of the camp, far from both the American barracks and the prisoner quarters. Inside was a table, 2 chairs, and a bed with a privacy screen. The floor was bare wood, and the single window had no curtain. That evening, Isaiah placed his rations on their shared table, canned beans, bread, and an apple. Aiko sat across from him, her face still unreadable. After a moment, she silently slid half the food back toward him. "Thank you," he said softly. "But please eat. You need strength." She looked at him briefly, confusion in her eyes, before returning her gaze to the table. Days passed in awkward silence. Each morning, Aiko rose before dawn. Isaiah would hear her quiet movements as she washed her face in the basin, then slipped out to begin her work at the infirmary laundry. He would lie still, eyes closed, giving her privacy. Isaiah spent his days guarding the infirmary entrance, watching Aiko from a distance as she washed linens and helped tend to minor injuries. In the evenings, he chopped wood, carried water, and ate his meals mostly alone while Aiko cleaned their small hut. He noticed small things about her, how she always faced east when she prayed at dawn, how she saved crumbs for the birds outside their window, how her hands were red and raw from washing, but she never complained. One afternoon, while carrying supplies to the infirmary, Isaiah saw Aiko struggling with a heavy crate of medical supplies. Before he could reach her, she stumbled and collapsed. "Aiko!" He rushed forward, gathering her in his arms. She felt light, too light. Had she been eating enough? He carried her inside the infirmary, where the doctor quickly examined her. "Exhaustion and malnutrition," the doctor said. "She needs rest and food. Real food, not just rations." As the doctor turned away, something fell from Aiko's sleeve, a small, worn photograph. Isaiah picked it up and saw the image of a Japanese boy, maybe 7 years old, with Aiko's same solemn eyes and a serious expression. When Aiko woke hours later, she immediately reached for her sleeve, panic crossing her face when she found nothing there. "Looking for this?" Isaiah asked gently, holding out the photograph. Tears filled her eyes. She reached for it with trembling hands. "Kenji," she whispered. "My son." Isaiah sat beside her bed, the weight of this new knowledge settling on his shoulders. "Your son," he repeated softly. "Where is he now?" Aiko clutched the photograph to her chest. "Japan," she whispered. "With grandmother. Before war." Her English was broken but understandable. That night, Isaiah sat outside their hut, staring at the moon reflecting on the distant ocean. He thought about the woman inside, not an enemy, but a mother separated from her child by war. A woman who had risked her life not for escape, but perhaps hoping to find news of her son. The next morning, Isaiah approached the camp administration office with determination in his stride. He requested permission to send a Red Cross inquiry about Aiko's son, Kenji Tanaka. The clerk looked at him as if he'd grown a second head. "You want to help find a Jap kid? Have you lost your mind, Carter?" "He's a child," Isaiah said firmly. "And he's my wife's son." The clerk snickered. "Right, your wife. I'll pass it along, but don't hold your breath." Later that day, Isaiah was summoned to the commander's office. "Private Carter," Colonel Jenkins said without looking up from his papers. "Your request has been denied. Mrs. Carter," he said the name with mockery, "is still classified as a prisoner of war. Her family is not your concern." "Sir, with respect, she's my wife now. That makes her family my family." The colonel finally looked up, irritation clear on his face. "That piece of paper doesn't change who she is or why she's here. Request denied. Dismissed." Isaiah left, anger burning in his chest. But he wasn't done trying. That afternoon, he sought out the camp chaplain, Reverend Thomas Hale, an older man with kind eyes and a quiet manner. "Reverend, I need help sending a letter through the Red Cross," Isaiah explained, "to find my wife's son in Japan." The chaplain studied Isaiah's face. "You know this could cause trouble for you." "I know, sir, but it's the right thing to do." Reverend Hale nodded slowly. "Come to my office tomorrow morning. Bring whatever information you have about the boy." That evening, over their simple dinner of rice and canned meat, Isaiah told Aiko what he'd done. "I talked to the chaplain. He's going to help us send a letter to the Red Cross to find Kenji." He spoke slowly, hoping she understood. Aiko lowered her head, and for a moment Isaiah thought she was upset. Then he saw a tear drop onto her plate. When she looked up, her eyes held something new, a tiny spark of hope. "Arigato," she whispered. "Thank you." It was the first time she'd spoken to him without fear in her voice. The next morning, Isaiah met with Reverend Hale, providing all the information Aiko had been able to tell him. Kenji's full name, his birth date, his grandmother's name, and their last known location in Nagasaki. That evening, as Isaiah returned to their hut, the chaplain stopped him on the path. "I sent your letter," he said quietly. "But I should warn you. Commander Jenkins found out. This could cost you your post, son." Isaiah nodded, squaring his shoulders. "Then so be it, Reverend. I appreciate your help." Weeks passed. October turned to November, bringing cooler weather and news that the camp would be downsizing. Many soldiers, including Isaiah's unit, were scheduled for discharge within the month. Notices were posted listing departure dates for ships heading back to the mainland. The camp had begun the process of either releasing prisoners or preparing them for return to Japan. Aiko, still classified as a POW despite her marriage, would be sent to Japan under military escort. Isaiah paced their small hut, running his hand over his close-cropped hair. "There has to be a way," he muttered. The thought of Aiko being put on a transport ship, alone and unprotected, filled him with dread. What would happen to her in a devastated Japan? How would she find her son? The next morning, he submitted a formal petition requesting to remain behind as Aiko's husband under civilian supervision. His discharge would be processed, but he would stay in Hawaii as her sponsor and guardian. 3 days later, he received his answer. Request denied. Isaiah's discharge date remained set for December 10th. Aiko would be transported back to Japan on December 15th. That evening, Isaiah knelt in the small camp chapel, the only place he found any peace. The wooden cross on the wall was simple, carved by a prisoner of war. Candles flickered, casting long shadows. "Lord," Isaiah whispered, "show me the way. I can't leave her like this. I promised to protect her." His voice broke. "Please, Lord, show me what to do." He didn't hear the footsteps behind him until a gentle hand touched his shoulder. "The Lord works in ways we don't always understand, son," said Reverend Hale, his voice soft in the quiet chapel. Isaiah looked up, wiping moisture from his eyes. "Reverend, I didn't hear you come in." "I heard your prayer," the older man said, easing himself onto the bench beside Isaiah. "And I might have a solution to offer." Reverend Hale's weathered face looked golden in the candlelight. "I own a small sugarcane farm outside the camp, about 5 miles down the coast. My wife Miriam and I have been looking for someone to help us manage it." He paused. "We're getting on in years, you see." Isaiah listened carefully as the Reverend continued. "If you stayed on as caretaker under the church's supervision, your wife could remain with you instead of being repatriated. I've already spoken with some contacts at headquarters. They're willing to consider it, given my standing with the military chaplaincy." Hope flared in Isaiah's chest. "You'd do that for us? For strangers?" Reverend Hale smiled gently. "The Good Samaritan helped a stranger on the road, did he not? Besides, I've watched you these past weeks. You're a good man, Isaiah Carter." The next morning, Isaiah told Aiko about the Reverend's offer. He spoke slowly, using simple words and gestures to help her understand. "Farm," he said, pointing to a sketch he'd made of fields and a house. "We go there. Stay together. Safe." Aiko's eyes widened slightly. "Together? Not Japan?" "Not Japan," Isaiah confirmed. "Not yet. First we find Kenji, then decide." She studied his face for a long moment, as if searching for deception. Finding none, she nodded once. "Hi." Later that day, papers were signed. Isaiah's discharge would proceed as scheduled, but instead of returning to Georgia, he would remain in Hawaii as a civilian employee of Reverend Hale's church. Aiko's status changed from prisoner awaiting repatriation to dependent spouse under civilian sponsorship. The morning of their departure dawned clear and bright. Isaiah and Aiko packed their few belongings, her kimono and photograph, his Bible and harmonica, the small ration of food they'd been given. Reverend Hale arrived with a borrowed wagon pulled by an old brown horse. Isaiah helped Aiko climb aboard, then sat beside her on the wooden bench. As they left the camp, passing through the gates that had held them for so long, Isaiah felt a weight lifting. The coastal road wound through palm trees and past fields of sugarcane swaying in the breeze. The ocean sparkled to their right, endless blue meeting the sky at the horizon. Aiko watched it silently, her face turned toward the warmth of the sun. For the first time since he'd known her, her shoulders weren't tense with fear. After several hours, they turned onto a narrow dirt road that led to a weathered farmhouse nestled among palm trees. The small house was painted white with blue shutters, though the paint had peeled in places. Behind it stretched modest fields of sugarcane, a barn, and a chicken coop. The ocean was visible just beyond, waves breaking on a rocky shore. As they approached, an older woman stepped onto the porch, Miriam Hale, the Reverend's wife. Her silver hair was tied in a neat bun, and she wore a simple blue dress with a white apron. She smiled and waved as the wagon pulled up. "Welcome to your new home," she called out, her voice warm and kind. She stepped forward to help Aiko down from the wagon, taking her hands. "I've set out some tea. You must be tired from your journey." Aiko bowed slightly, murmuring, "Thank you," in her soft voice. Miriam led them inside to a small kitchen, where a teapot steamed on the stove, and a plate of biscuits waited on the table. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating simple but clean furnishings, a wooden table with 4 chairs, shelves lined with jars of preserves, a Bible on the windowsill. "It's not much," Miriam said, "but it's a place for healing." The first week at the Hale farm was filled with uneasy adjustments. Isaiah worked from sunrise to sunset, repairing irrigation ditches in the sugarcane fields, fixing leaks in the barn roof, and clearing overgrown paths. His hands blistered, then calloused. At night, he fell into exhausted sleep on a cot in the small back room they'd been given. Aiko spent her days helping Miriam, scrubbing floors, washing linens, and tending to the small vegetable garden behind the house. She was quick to learn and worked tirelessly, though she rarely spoke. The locals who passed by on horseback or in wagons often slowed to stare at the unusual couple. Some merely looked curious, but others were openly hostile. One morning, a woman riding past spat near the gate where Aiko was sweeping. "War bride," she hissed before riding on. Aiko froze, her hands tightening on the broom handle. Miriam, who had witnessed the incident from the porch, came down and gently placed a hand on Aiko's shoulder. "Don't you mind her," Miriam said softly. "People will learn in time. They always do." Each evening, Isaiah and Aiko would sit at the kitchen table after dinner, and he would teach her simple English words, pointing to objects around them. "Water," he said, touching a glass. "Water," Aiko repeated carefully. "Sun," he said, pointing out the window to the setting sun. "Sun," she echoed, the word clear on her lips. "Hope," he said, placing a hand over his heart. Aiko looked at him questioningly. "Hope," Isaiah repeated. "It means—" He struggled to explain, then pointed to the sky, then to her heart. "Believing good things will come." "Hope," she whispered, placing her own hand over her heart. Then she pointed to the photograph of Kenji that sat on their small table. "Hope." Isaiah nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "Yes, hope for Kenji." One evening, as rain began to fall, they shared a humble supper of rice and sweet potatoes that Aiko had prepared. The sound of raindrops on the tin roof filled the silence between them. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating Aiko's face. She looked up from her plate and met Isaiah's eyes directly for the first time in days. "Home?" she asked softly, gesturing to the room around them, uncertainty in her voice. Isaiah nodded, understanding all she was asking. Was this temporary? Was this safe? Could they really stay? "If you'll have it," he replied gently. The smallest of smiles touched Aiko's lips before she lowered her head again. But it was enough. It was a beginning. Days stretched into weeks at the Hale farm. December brought cooler breezes across the cane fields. The work was hard but honest, and slowly a rhythm formed in their strange new life. Each morning, Isaiah rose with the sun to repair fences damaged by coastal winds. He'd watch as golden light spilled across the fields, turning the sugarcane stalks into shimmering spears. The war seemed farther away with each passing day. Aiko woke even earlier. Isaiah often found breakfast waiting, rice with a fried egg, or sweet bread Miriam had taught her to make. She would bow slightly when he entered the kitchen, then continue her tasks without words. After breakfast, Aiko tended to the chickens behind the house. Isaiah noticed how she spoke softly to them in Japanese, scattering feed with gentle hands. The hens, at first skittish around her, now came when she called. In the afternoons, while Isaiah worked with Reverend Hale in the fields, Aiko helped Miriam with household chores. The older woman taught her to cook American dishes and helped improve her English. In return, Aiko showed Miriam how to fold paper into delicate cranes and taught her simple Japanese phrases. One day, Isaiah returned from the fields to find Aiko sitting on the back porch, writing in a small notebook with careful strokes. When she saw him, she quickly closed it. "Writing?" he asked gently. She nodded, holding the notebook to her chest. "For remember." "May I see?" he asked, sitting down beside her. After a moment's hesitation, she opened the notebook. Inside were beautiful Japanese characters, line after line. At the bottom of each page was a date. "It's like stories?" he asked. "Memories," she explained softly. "For Kenji, when I find him." Isaiah nodded, understanding. She was creating a record of her days, her journey, to share with her son someday. That night, Isaiah noticed the Reverend coughing badly at dinner. Without a word, Aiko rose and brewed a special tea with herbs she'd gathered from the garden. She placed it beside the old man's plate with a respectful bow. "This help," she said simply. Reverend Hale sipped it cautiously, then smiled. "Why, that does ease the chest. Thank you, my dear." After that, Aiko often left food by the Reverend's door when his cough troubled him at night. The old man began calling her our healing angel. As their English lessons continued each evening, misunderstandings sometimes led to unexpected moments of laughter. One night, Isaiah tried to explain how the tractor worked. "Tractor pulls plow," he said, mimicking the motion with his hands. "Trako?" Aiko repeated, her pronunciation making the word sound exotic. Isaiah chuckled. "Close enough." Another time, Aiko tried to tell Isaiah about a recipe Miriam had taught her. "Butter," she said, making a spreading motion. "Jam." Then she pointed to her mouth and made a face of disgust. "You don't like jam?" Isaiah asked, confused. "No, no." She frantically shook her head, then pretended to sprinkle something. "Too sweet?" "Ah, too much sugar in the jam," Isaiah realized, smiling. Aiko nodded vigorously, relieved to be understood. These small moments of shared humor began to crack the wall between them. Reverend Hale noticed one day and chuckled. "That's God's humor at work. Laughter is his way of bringing souls together." One quiet evening, as they sat by lantern light, Aiko opened her notebook and began to sketch. Isaiah watched as her slender fingers moved the pencil across the page, creating the outline of a child with serious eyes and a gentle smile. Kenji. Isaiah felt his heart tighten at the longing in her face. "He has your eyes," he said softly. Aiko touched the drawing gently. "Smart boy, kind heart. We'll find him," Isaiah promised, and bowed his head in silent prayer that Kenji was alive and safe, somewhere across the vast ocean that separated a mother from her child. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright. Miriam announced at breakfast that she would be taking Aiko to the village market to sell some of their eggs and vegetables. "It's time folks got to know her," Miriam said firmly when Isaiah looked concerned. "Can't hide away forever." Isaiah nodded reluctantly. "I reckon you're right. I'll be delivering cane stalks to the mill today anyway." As Miriam and Aiko loaded the wagon with baskets of eggs, bunches of herbs, and sacks of sweet potatoes, Isaiah watched with a mixture of pride and worry. Aiko wore a simple blue dress that Miriam had given her, her hair tied back with a ribbon. "You'll be fine," he assured her, though his own stomach knotted with concern. "Just stay close to Miriam." Aiko nodded, understanding more than she could express. "I be careful." The village was a collection of wooden buildings along a dusty main street. A general store, a church, a small schoolhouse, and various shops. As their wagon pulled up near the open-air market where local farmers sold their goods, people turned to stare. Whispers followed Aiko as she helped Miriam set up their small stand. Children pointed, and some women pulled their little ones closer, as if she carried some disease. "Don't you pay them no mind," Miriam whispered, patting Aiko's hand. "They'll come around." For the first hour, few people approached their stand. Aiko stood quietly beside Miriam, head slightly bowed, hands folded before her. Meanwhile, Isaiah arrived at the sugar mill on the other side of town. As he unloaded cane stalks from his wagon, 2 white soldiers on leave sauntered by. He recognized them from the POW camp. "Well, look who it is," one called out. "The man with the war bride." Isaiah continued working, trying to ignore them. "How's married life, Carter?" The other soldier taunted. "Does she bow before getting into bed?" Isaiah's hands tightened on the cane, stalks, knuckles whitening. He thought of Aiko's quiet dignity, of the son she yearned for, of all she had endured. "You should show some respect," he said quietly, still not looking at them. The soldiers laughed. "Respect? For a Jap? You gone soft in the head, boy." Isaiah's every instinct screamed to fight, to defend Aiko's honor. His muscles tensed, ready to swing. But then he remembered Reverend Hale's words. "Violence only confirms what they already believe about you. Choose the harder path." Taking a deep breath, Isaiah set down the cane stalks and walked away, back straight and head high. The soldiers called after him, but their words fell empty on the dusty road behind him. Back at the market, something unexpected was happening. A local woman had approached Aiko's stand, curious about a small basket of items separate from the farm goods, beautifully embroidered handkerchiefs with delicate flowers and birds. "Did you make these?" the woman asked, picking one up. Aiko nodded shyly. "Hi, yes. They're lovely," the woman said, examining the fine stitching. "How much?" Aiko looked to Miriam, unsure. 2 eggs for 1 handkerchief," Miriam suggested. "Or we can trade for other goods." The woman hesitated only briefly before reaching into her basket. "I'll take 2. Here's a dozen eggs." Soon other women approached, drawn by the beautiful embroidery. By noon, all of Aiko's handkerchiefs had been traded for eggs, jars of preserves, a sack of flour, and even a length of pretty blue ribbon. When Isaiah returned to meet them, he was surprised to find Aiko surrounded by village women, teaching them how to fold an origami bird. Her hands moved gracefully as she demonstrated, speaking in her soft, careful English. "Fold corner to corner. Yes, like that. Now turn." The women followed her instructions, laughing when their attempts came out lopsided. Miriam beamed at Isaiah. What did I tell you? People just needed to see her for themselves. That evening, as they prepared for bed in their small room, Aiko approached Isaiah and held out a folded handkerchief. He took it, surprised to find his initial, I, embroidered in the corner, surrounded by stalks of sugarcane. Beneath the initial was a single word: courage. "When did you learn this word?" he asked, touching the delicate stitching. Aiko smiled her small, secret smile and returned to her side of the room. Isaiah didn't ask how she'd learned the word, but his heart felt lighter than it had in months. Word spread quickly about the unusual couple living at Reverend Hale's farm. Some stories were merely curious, how a colored man and Japanese woman were working the sugarcane fields together. Other rumors were darker, suggesting Aiko was a spy or that Isaiah had betrayed his country. One morning in early January, a black car with military markings pulled up to the farm. Isaiah was repairing the chicken coop when he saw it approach. He quickly went to the house where Aiko was helping Miriam bake bread. "Army's here," he said quietly. "Stay calm." A uniformed officer stepped out of the car, holding a clipboard. "Private Carter?" he called. "It's just Carter now," Isaiah replied, stepping forward. "I'm discharged." The officer nodded. "I'm Lieutenant Ross from headquarters. I've been sent to verify your marriage and living situation." Isaiah straightened his shoulders. "Everything's in order. I have the papers inside. I'll need to speak with Mrs. Carter as well," the lieutenant said. Isaiah led him to the house where Aiko stood nervously by the kitchen table, flour dusting her hands. When she saw the uniform, her face paled. "This is Lieutenant Ross," Isaiah explained gently. "He needs to ask us some questions." For the next hour, the lieutenant inspected their marriage certificate, living quarters, and work arrangements. He questioned them separately about when they met, how long they'd known each other, and their plans for the future. As the questioning continued, Aiko became increasingly anxious. Her English faltered, and she began to tremble. When the lieutenant asked about her life in Japan before the war, she suddenly swayed on her feet. "Aiko!" Isaiah rushed to her side as she collapsed. Her skin was hot to the touch, her breathing shallow. "She has a fever," Miriam said, touching Aiko's forehead. "Help me get her to bed." The lieutenant watched with narrowed eyes as Isaiah carried Aiko to their room. "I'll conclude my inspection," he said, making notes on his clipboard. "But I'll be filing a report about this situation." "Do what you must," Reverend Hale said firmly. "But now I think you should leave. The poor woman needs rest." As the lieutenant departed, he muttered under his breath, "This union won't last." For 3 days, Aiko burned with fever. Miriam applied cool cloths to her forehead and brewed medicinal teas. Isaiah barely left her side, holding her hand and whispering prayers as she tossed in restless sleep. On the evening of the 3rd day, as rain pattered against the roof, Isaiah sat beside Aiko's bed reading from the Psalms. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," he read softly. "He maketh me to lie down in green pastures, he leadeth me beside the still waters." Aiko's eyes fluttered open. "Water," she whispered. Isaiah quickly helped her sit up, supporting her back as she sipped from a cup. Her fever had broken, her skin cool and damp. "You scared me something fierce," he said, relief washing over him. "Sorry," she murmured weakly. "No need for sorry. Just get well." That night, after Aiko had fallen into a peaceful sleep, Isaiah stepped outside into the cool night air. Stars blanketed the sky above the cane fields, the ocean a distant murmur beyond. He looked up at the vast expanse and felt very small. "Lord," he whispered, "if this is my test, help me pass. Give me strength to protect her, to help her find her boy, to be the man you created me to be." 2 weeks later, as January gave way to February, Aiko had regained her strength. The morning was crisp as Isaiah helped Reverend Hale load the wagon with sugarcane to take to market. "We'll need supplies from the general store," the Reverend said, "and I'll check for mail at the church office." Since the fever, Aiko had thrown herself into work with new determination. Each day she practiced her English, helped with the farm chores, and worked on her embroidery, which now brought in extra money at the market. In the evenings, she would sit with her notebook, writing messages to Kenji. When Isaiah and the Reverend returned that afternoon, the old man's face was somber. He held a yellow telegram in his hand. "It came through the Red Cross," he said quietly, handing it to Isaiah. "From Japan." Isaiah's heart pounded as he took the telegram. Aiko, who was sweeping the porch, froze when she saw it. "Kenji," she whispered, the broom falling from her hands. Isaiah unfolded the paper, hands trembling slightly. The message was brief but clear. "Child Kenji Tanaka located Nagasaki stop condition. Poor stop radiation exposure. Stop requires medical attention. Stop contact mission office for details. Stop. Isaiah looked up to see Aiko's face drain of color. Radiation, she repeated. From bomb? He nodded grimly. The atomic bomb that had ended the war had also touched Aiko's son with its deadly reach. He translated the rest of the message as gently as he could. He's alive, Aiko. That's what matters. He's been found. Tears streamed down her face as she sank to her knees on the porch, the telegram clutched to her chest. Isaiah knelt beside her, placing a hesitant arm around her shoulders. We'll help him, he promised. Somehow. That evening, after Aiko had cried herself to sleep, Isaiah met with Reverend Hale in the kitchen. The boy needs medicine, Isaiah said. Special medicine for the radiation sickness. The Reverend nodded gravely. Such treatments are expensive and hard to come by, even here, in Japan. He left the thought unfinished. I got a little saved, Isaiah said. Not much, but there's this. He pulled out his pocket watch, silver, engraved with his initials, a gift from his father before he died. It's worth something. Are you certain, son? That's your family legacy. Isaiah looked toward the room where Aiko slept. I reckon some things matter more than keepsakes. The next morning, Isaiah rode into town and sold his pocket watch to a jeweler. The money wasn't much, but combined with their savings, it might be enough for medicine. Can you arrange shipment to Japan? Isaiah asked the Reverend. Through the mission network? I'll send a telegram today. Reverend Hale promised. The Nagasaki mission has doctors. They'll know what the boy needs. That night Isaiah found Aiko still awake, sewing by lamplight. Beside her lay piles of handkerchiefs, small garments and blankets, all beautifully embroidered. For sale, she explained, not looking up. For Kenji medicine. Her fingers worked, tirelessly, needle flashing in the dim light. As Isaiah watched, he noticed her lips moving in silent prayer with every stitch. He quietly withdrew, leaving her to her work and her prayers, humbled by her determination. As February warmed into March, something began to change in the village's attitude toward Aiko. It started when she helped deliver Mrs. Wilson's baby during a sudden storm. Isaiah had been fixing a leak in the Wilsons' barn when Sarah Wilson's labor pains began, 2 weeks earlier than expected. The doctor was trapped on the other side of a flooded road. My wife, Tom Wilson had gasped, running into the barn. The baby's coming. No doctor, no midwife. Isaiah remembered that Aiko had assisted midwives in the camp. My wife can help, he said, already running toward the house. Aiko didn't hesitate. She gathered clean cloths, hot water, and herbs from her garden. For hours she stayed by Sarah's side, speaking soothingly in her limited English, guiding her through the difficult birth. When a healthy baby girl finally arrived, crying lustily, Sarah gripped Aiko's hand. Thank you, she whispered. I was so scared. News of Aiko's skill and kindness spread through the village. The next Sunday, several families nodded to them at church. A farmer named Johnson brought them a gift of tools, a new rake and hoe with sturdy handles. Heard you're fixing up that abandoned field, he said gruffly to Isaiah. These might help. The field in question lay behind the Reverend's property, overgrown with weeds and littered with rocks, but with rich soil beneath. Isaiah and Aiko had begun clearing it together in the afternoons, planning to plant taro and beans. Each day after their regular chores, they worked side by side, pulling weeds, removing stones, and preparing the earth for planting. Isaiah taught Aiko the English names for tools and plants. She showed him how to test soil by feel and smell. One afternoon, as they rested in the shade of a palm tree, Isaiah realized something had changed. The silences between them were no longer awkward but comfortable. They moved around each other with an easy familiarity. And sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, he caught Aiko watching him with something like affection in her eyes. That evening, after a simple supper of fish stew, Isaiah took out his harmonica. He hadn't played since before the war, but his fingers remembered the old hymns his mother had taught him. As the sweet notes of Amazing Grace filled their small kitchen, Aiko closed her eyes and began to hum softly. The melody wrapped around them like a gentle embrace. From the porch, Miriam smiled at her husband, whispering, "They're beginning to live, Thomas. Truly live." Early December brought heavy rains that turned the roads to mud. Isaiah was repairing a hole in the barn roof when Reverend Hale called up to him, waving an official-looking envelope. "Letter for you," the old man said, his expression troubled. "Military seal." Isaiah climbed down, wiping his hands on his pants before taking the envelope. His heart sank as he read the contents. "I have to report to Honolulu," he said quietly. "Military Review Board wants to examine our marriage before finalizing my discharge." "What happens if they rule against you?" Reverend Hale asked. Isaiah looked toward the house where Aiko was helping Miriam can vegetables. "They'll deport her, send her back to Japan without me." That evening, Isaiah explained the situation to Aiko as gently as he could. "We have to go to the big city," he said, pointing to Honolulu on a small map. "Men there want to ask questions about us, about our marriage." Aiko's face paled, but she nodded. "I understand." Her English had improved greatly over the months. "When we go?" 3 days from now. The Reverend says he'll come with us for support." The next days were a flurry of preparation. Miriam packed food for the journey. Isaiah repaired their best clothes. Aiko was quieter than usual, spending long hours writing in her notebook. On the morning of their departure, dawn hadn't yet broken when they loaded the wagon. Dark clouds hung heavy overhead, promising more rain. The journey would take 2 days, first by wagon to the port, then by ferry to Honolulu. "The Lord goes before you," Miriam said, hugging them both. "Remember that." The first day's travel was difficult. Rain poured down steadily, soaking through the tarp they'd stretched over the wagon. By evening, they were drenched and chilled to the bone. They stopped at a roadside inn, but the proprietor took one look at their mixed group and shook his head. "No vacancy," he said flatly, though the parking area was empty. They spent the night under the wagon, huddled beneath tarps as rain drummed overhead. Isaiah gave Aiko his jacket, insisting she needed it more. She accepted it with quiet gratitude, then surprised him by sharing her small blanket in return. The second day brought clearing skies but muddy roads that slowed their progress. The ferry crossing was rough, waves splashing over the deck as they made their way to Oahu. Aiko, who had grown up near the sea, stood steady while Isaiah and the Reverend gripped the railings. By the time they reached Honolulu's harbor, night was falling. The city's lights twinkled along the shore, beautiful but somehow threatening. This was where their future would be decided. As they stood on the deck, watching the harbor grow closer, Aiko suddenly clutched Isaiah's sleeve. "Together?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the waves. Isaiah covered her hand with his own, feeling the calluses that matched his own, evidence of their shared labor, their shared life. "Together," he confirmed. "No matter what." The Military Review Board convened in a stark room at the base headquarters. 3 officers sat behind a long table, their faces impassive as Isaiah and Aiko entered. Reverend Hale followed, Bible in hand. "Private Isaiah Carter," the senior officer began. "Former guard at POW Camp 27, and Aiko Tanaka, former prisoner at said camp. You are here for review of your marriage status prior to final discharge processing." For over an hour, they questioned Isaiah's motives, his background, his future plans. They asked about the farm, about his relationship with Aiko, about how they communicated. "You expect us to believe this is a genuine marriage?" one officer asked with a sneer. "You barely spoke the same language when this arrangement was made." Before Isaiah could answer, Aiko stood. The room fell silent as she straightened her simple dress and looked directly at the officers. "Love," she said in her careful English. "No need same language." She touched her heart. "Love no color, only heart." The officers exchanged glances. The senior officer cleared his throat. "Mrs. Carter makes an interesting point," he said. "However, there are practical concerns. Housing, employment, support." Reverend Hale stepped forward. "Isaiah works for my church mission. We provide housing and steady employment. The local community has accepted them." He handed over letters from neighbors, including the Wilsons, testifying to Isaiah and Aiko's character. After a brief deliberation, the board announced their decision. The marriage would remain valid, but Isaiah's army pension and housing benefits would be revoked. They were on their own. "You are free to go," the senior officer said. "Good luck, Mr. Carter. You're going to need it." That night, they slept in a church storeroom offered by a friend of Reverend Hale's. Their bedding was a pile of old hymnals covered with a single blanket they shared. Despite the discomfort, a sense of relief hung in the air. They were still together, still a family, strange as it was. As rain began to patter against the storeroom window, Isaiah whispered in the darkness, "We start again, together." Aiko's hand found his in the darkness. "Together," she agreed. They left Honolulu the next morning under clearing skies, but as they traveled back toward the farm, dark clouds gathered on the horizon. By afternoon, the wind had picked up, bending palm trees and sending leaves skittering across the road. "Storm's brewing," Reverend Hale said worriedly. "A big one, by the look of it." They pushed on, trying to reach home before the worst hit. The ferry captain warned them of high seas ahead, but agreed to make one last crossing before battening down for the night. By the time they reached the coastal road leading to the farm, rain was falling in sheets. Thunder boomed overhead, and lightning split the sky in jagged forks. "There!" Isaiah shouted over the storm's roar, pointing to lights in the distance. "The farm!" As they drew closer, his heart sank. Water was already pooling in the fields. The small stream that ran behind the property had swollen to twice its normal size, rushing brown and angry toward the sea. Miriam ran out to meet them, her grey hair plastered to her face. "Thank the Lord you're back. The animals, we need to get them to higher ground." For hours they battled the storm. Isaiah and the Reverend led livestock to the barn on the hill, while Aiko and Miriam moved valuables to the second floor of the house. The rain fell harder. The wind howled like a wounded animal. Around midnight, the stream broke its banks. Water surged across the lower fields, washing away newly planted crops and flooding the chicken coop. Isaiah waded through chest-deep water to rescue the hens, carrying them 2 at a time to safety. As he returned for a final check of the lower grounds, he heard a scream. Through the curtain of rain, he saw Aiko struggling in the swirling water. She had gone to secure the tool shed, but a surge had knocked her off her feet. "Aiko!" Isaiah plunged into the flood, fighting the current. His strong arms cut through the water as he reached her, wrapping one arm around her waist. "I've got you! Hold on!" Together they fought their way to higher ground, Isaiah half carrying her through the churning water. As they reached the barn, Reverend Hale rushed to help them inside, then suddenly clutched his chest and collapsed. "Reverend!" Isaiah eased him to the straw-covered floor. The old man's face was grey, his breathing labored. "Just need rest," he gasped. "Too much excitement." As they tended to the Reverend, Isaiah noticed blood soaking through his own pant leg. In his rush to save Aiko, he hadn't felt the sharp piece of metal that had sliced his thigh. "You hurt," Aiko said, her eyes widening at the sight of the blood. "It's nothing," Isaiah insisted, but when he tried to stand, his leg buckled beneath him. By dawn the rain had stopped, but the damage was extensive. Half the fields were underwater. The chicken coop was gone. The Reverend's house stood, but part of the roof had collapsed, and the lower floor was flooded. Isaiah, his leg bandaged by Eiko, carried her through the mud to a small rise where they could see the extent of the destruction. Their newly planted field was now a lake. Months of work had been washed away in a single night. As the sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light on the devastation below, Isaiah felt Eiko's hand slip into his. Together they stood in silence, surveying what remained of their home. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, Eiko began to pray, first in Japanese, then in halting English. "Thank you, God, for life, for safety, for each other." Isaiah squeezed her hand, adding his own silent prayer for strength in the days ahead. They had weathered the storm. Somehow, they would rebuild. The days after the flood were the hardest they'd faced since leaving the camp. Morning revealed the full damage, fields of sugarcane flattened by water, fences torn away, and mud everywhere. The chicken coop had vanished completely, though thankfully most of the hens had been saved. Where do we even start? Isaiah wondered aloud, surveying the brown water that still covered the lower fields. His injured leg throbbed beneath its bandage, a constant reminder of the night's dangers. "We start here," Eiko said simply, handing him a shovel. "One scoop at a time." Relief efforts began to arrive from the village. Mr. Wilson drove up in his truck, bringing bread, dried fish, and clean clothing. Mrs. Lee from the general store sent blankets and candles. Even the shopkeeper who had once refused to serve Eiko brought nails and hammer for repairs. "Heard you folks took a beating," he said gruffly, not quite meeting her eyes. Thought these might help. Reverend and Mrs. Hale had moved temporarily into town. The doctor insisted the Reverend needed rest after his collapse during the flood. "His heart can't take that kind of strain," the doctor had explained. "He needs quiet and care." Before leaving, Reverend Hale had pressed Isaiah's hand. "The farm is in your hands now, son. Do what needs doing." Isaiah and Eiko remained, determined to rebuild. They cleaned mud from the house one room at a time, salvaging what they could. At night, they slept in the barn, which had stayed dry on its hillside perch. Isaiah's leg wound worsened, despite Eiko's care. By the third day, angry red streaks spread from the gash, and fever made him shiver despite the warm air. "Need doctor," Eiko insisted, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead. "Can't afford it," Isaiah mumbled through parched lips. "Save the money for repairs." Eiko frowned, then disappeared from the barn. She returned an hour later with an elderly Hawaiian woman named Makana, known in the village for her knowledge of traditional healing. "Foolish man," Makana clucked, examining the wound. "Infection bad. Could lose leg." From her basket, she produced plants and herbs gathered from the mountainside. She boiled some into a strong-smelling tea, which she made Isaiah drink. Others she ground into a paste and packed around his wound, wrapping it with clean cloth. "Change every morning and night," she instructed Eiko. "He stay off leg 3 days. No work." "But the farm," Isaiah protested weakly. "Farm wait," Makana said firmly. "Leg don't wait." For 3 days, Isaiah lay on a cot in the barn, frustrated at his weakness while Eiko worked from dawn until dusk. She cleared debris, salvaged damaged crops, and gathered fallen cane stalks to dry for firewood. In the evening, she would return, tired but determined, to change his bandage and bring him food. On the 4th morning, the fever broke. Isaiah woke to find a stray dog curled at the foot of his cot, a brown and white mutt with one ear up and one ear down. The dog thumped its tail when Isaiah stirred. "Made a friend, I see," Isaiah said when Eiko entered with breakfast. "He come yesterday," Eiko explained, setting down a bowl of rice porridge. Help me find chickens. Smart dog. The animal looked up at her adoringly, and Isaiah understood the feeling. In the midst of destruction, Aiko had become a pillar of quiet strength. Her movements were sure, her face peaceful despite everything they'd lost. "Your leg better?" she asked, kneeling to check the wound. "Much better," he confirmed, surprised to find it was true. The angry red streaks had faded, and the swelling had gone down. Makana's herbal wrap had drawn out the poison. "Good. Need help today," Aiko said, her practical tone hiding the relief in her eyes. "Roof still leaking." That afternoon, despite Aiko's protests that he should rest another day, Isaiah climbed carefully onto the damaged roof. From this height, he could see the surrounding land. Water was finally receding from the fields, leaving behind a layer of silt that would eventually enrich the soil. Nature's way of renewing itself, he thought. As he nailed new shingles in place, he heard Aiko reading aloud below, practicing her English by reading the Reverend's Bible on the porch. Her voice carried up to him, halting but determined. The rains came down, and the floods came up, but the house on the rock stood firm. Isaiah smiled despite his aching muscles. They had weathered the storm. They would rebuild their home on solid ground. That evening, a letter arrived from Reverend Hale. Aiko read it aloud slowly by lamplight. "Dear Isaiah and Aiko," she began. "The doctor says I must rest some weeks more. Miriam sends her love. Remember that grace is not found in peace but in perseverance. You have shown great courage. We are proud of you both." Isaiah watched Aiko's face in the golden lamplight. Her cheeks had grown thinner these past months, but her eyes held a quiet strength that humbled him. From outside came the soft rustling of palms in the night breeze, nature's gentle reminder that life continued. "We'll be all right," he said softly, and for the first time, he truly believed it. April brought gentle rains and warm sunshine, perfect weather for new growth. The farm slowly came back to life under Isaiah and Aiko's care. They couldn't afford to replant all the fields, so they focused on the areas closest to the house, planting fast-growing vegetables alongside the remaining sugarcane. Their savings were gone, used for medicine and repairs. Isaiah needed to find paying work. One morning, he walked the 5 miles to Johnson's garage in the village, where he'd sometimes helped repair farm equipment. "Looking for steady work," he told Mr. Johnson. "Can fix just about anything with an engine. Learn quick what I don't already know." Mr. Johnson, a heavy-set man with oil-stained hands, studied him. "Don't have much. Could use help 3 days a week hauling scrap metal, organizing parts. Pay's not great." "I'll take it," Isaiah said without hesitation. On days he wasn't at the garage, Isaiah worked on the farm. Slowly, one room at a time, they made the house livable again. Aiko discovered a talent for mending, first their own clothes, then items for neighbors. Soon she had a small business repairing tiers, replacing buttons, and even altering garments to fit better. "Mrs. Wilson says she paid 2 eggs for fixed dress," Aiko announced one evening, showing Isaiah a torn seam she'd mended so perfectly the repair was invisible. They saved every coin and egg in a tin jar on the shelf. Isaiah carved a wooden lid for it, painting the word "future" in careful letters. Each night they counted their small treasure, planning how to use it. "First, fix roof better," Aiko would say, pointing to the places that still leaked during heavy rain. "Then more chickens," Isaiah would add. "Get the flock built back up." The stray dog had become a permanent fixture, following them everywhere. They named him Buddy, and he earned his keep by warning when wild pigs approached the garden and helping round up the remaining chickens each evening. One Sunday in early May, Isaiah used some of their savings to buy lumber. Over the next week he rebuilt the chicken coop, larger and stronger than before. When it was finished, he added a small sign above the door. Aiko's hens. My hens? Aiko asked, surprised. Your hens, Isaiah confirmed with a smile. You saved them during the flood. They trust you. The simple gift brought tears to her eyes. That evening she presented him with a surprise of her own, a cloth-wrapped package containing a simple metal frame. Inside was the photograph of Kenji, now protected from damage. For your table, she said softly. Family picture. Isaiah ran his finger gently over the frame. Family, he repeated, the word feeling right in his mouth. By June, they had rebuilt a single room of the farmhouse, the kitchen with its stone fireplace. The walls were freshly whitewashed, the floor scrubbed clean. Aiko hung curtains made from flour sacks at the windows, embroidered with blue birds that seemed to fly across the fabric. They were still sleeping in the barn, saving money to repair the bedroom next. One evening, after a long day of work, Isaiah nailed a small, hand-painted sign above the rebuilt kitchen doorway. What say? Aiko asked, unable to read the English words. Faith House, Isaiah told her, because that's what built it. Faith in God, faith in each other. Aiko nodded, understanding perfectly. Then, to Isaiah's surprise, she reached for his hand, her slender fingers twining with his work-roughened ones. They stood that way for a long moment, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant orange and pink above their slowly healing land. That night, as they prepared for sleep in their separate corners of the barn, Aiko spoke softly in the darkness. Isaiah, yes, I happy here, with you, even after— She paused, searching for words. Even after flood, after everything. The simple declaration washed over him like warm sunlight. I'm happy too, Aiko, he replied. Didn't expect to be, but I am. In the quiet darkness, something shifted between them, a recognition of the bond that had formed not through ceremony or obligation, but through shared struggle and quiet daily kindnesses. Good night, he whispered. Oyasumi, she replied. Sleep well. Early July brought heavy humidity and blazing sunshine. The rebuilt fields flourished in the heat, and their vegetable garden provided enough for their needs with extra to sell at the village market. Isaiah's work at the garage had increased to 4 days a week. Life had found a new rhythm, still hard but purposeful. One morning, as they worked side by side in the garden, Isaiah noticed Aiko pause, pressing a hand to her chest. A small cough escaped her lips, then another. You all right? He asked, concern creasing his brow. Dust, she said dismissively, returning to her weeding. But the cough came back that evening, and the next day. Within a week, it had become persistent, a deep, rattling sound that worried Isaiah more each day. Need to see doctor, he insisted one evening when he found her leaning against the barn wall, struggling to catch her breath. Cost too much, she argued weakly. Save money for farm, for Kenji. But Isaiah wouldn't be swayed. The next day he took her to Dr. Henderson in the village, using money they'd been saving for lumber to fix the bedroom. The doctor listened to Aiko's chest with a stethoscope, his expression growing more serious with each breath he asked her to take. He asked questions about her history. Had she been sick before? Had she been exposed to chemicals or smoke? She was in Nagasaki, Isaiah explained quietly. Before the camp. Not when the bomb fell, but— Dr. Henderson nodded gravely. I've seen this in other Japanese detainees. Lung damage, possibly from wartime conditions, maybe industrial work, maybe exposure to radiation after the bomb, even at a distance. Can you help her? Isaiah asked, hearing the fear in his own voice. The doctor sighed. Rest, clean air, good food. I can give medicine for the symptoms, but— He left the thought unfinished, his expression saying what his words did not. On the ride home, Aiko was unusually quiet, staring at the passing fields. When they reached the farm, she went directly to their tin savings jar and emptied it on the table, counting the coins carefully. "Not enough," she murmured. "Not yet enough for passage." "Passage?" Isaiah asked. "Passage where?" Aiko looked up, her face resolved despite the pallor of illness. "To Japan? To Kenji? Must go soon." Isaiah felt as if he'd been struck. "The doctor didn't say, doctor not say, but I know." She placed a hand over her heart. "Feel it here. Time short." That night, Isaiah couldn't sleep. He walked outside, letting the cool night air fill his lungs, the same air that seemed to be slowly suffocating Aiko. The stars above were brilliant, unconcerned with human suffering below. He thought about the Red Cross telegram from months ago. Kenji's condition had been poor then. What must it be like now? A child suffering from radiation sickness needed his mother, and a mother needed her child, especially if her time might be limited. The thought of Aiko leaving tore at his heart. These past months, their forced marriage had become something real, a partnership built on mutual respect and growing affection. The farm felt alive with her presence. The thought of continuing without her seemed impossible. But as dawn lightened the eastern sky, Isaiah knew what he had to do. He couldn't keep her from her son. Love didn't hold tight. It set free. Isaiah sent another letter through the mission network, requesting news of Kenji's condition. Weeks passed with no answer. Aiko's cough worsened. She tried to hide it, turning away when the spasms came, but Isaiah heard her at night, struggling for breath. One evening in late July, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance above the fields, a truck approached, raising dust on the road. It was Reverend Hale, finally well enough to visit. His face was thinner, but his smile was as warm as ever. "Brought the mail," he called, waving an envelope. "From Japan." Aiko stood quickly, swaying slightly on her feet. Isaiah steadied her as the Reverend handed her the letter. Her hands trembled as she opened it, her eyes scanning the Japanese characters rapidly. "Kenji," she whispered. "Very sick. Fever not break. Medicine from America helps some, but doctor say—" Her voice broke. "Doctor say need mother." Isaiah and the Reverend exchanged glances. They both knew what this meant. "I must go home," Aiko said, looking up at Isaiah with tears in her eyes. Home. The word pierced his heart. Despite everything they'd built together, Japan was still home to her, because Kenji was there, and a mother belonged with her child. "Yes," Isaiah said simply. "You must." The next morning, Isaiah rose before dawn. Without waking Aiko, he walked to the small chest where he kept his few personal possessions. From the bottom, wrapped in a clean handkerchief, he took out his bronze star, awarded for bravery during a night patrol in the Philippines. It was his most valuable possession, both in worth and meaning. His commanding officer had cited extraordinary courage under fire when presenting it. Isaiah had never considered selling it until now. Buddy followed at his heels as he walked into town, the medal heavy in his pocket. The pawnshop owner, Mr. Greeley, raised his eyebrows when Isaiah placed it on the counter. "That's a bronze star, son. You sure you want to part with it?" Isaiah nodded. "How much?" The amount Greeley offered was more than Isaiah expected. Combined with their savings, it would be enough for passage to Japan and some extra for medicines. Relief and sorrow mingled in his chest as he pocketed the money. On the walk home, he stopped at the hillside overlooking the farm. From here, he could see the fields they'd replanted, the repaired roof, the small garden bursting with vegetables. Faith House, their home. "Lord," he prayed quietly, "give me strength for what comes next." Aiko was hanging laundry when he returned. The simple, domestic scene, her slender figure moving between sheets billowing in the breeze, made his throat tighten. How many more such moments would they have? That evening, after a simple supper of fish and sweet potatoes, Isaiah placed an envelope on the table between them. "What this?" Aiko asked. "Money," he said softly. "For passage to Japan. For you to take Kenji's medicine yourself." Her eyes widened. "How?" "Doesn't matter how," Isaiah said. "What matters is that you can go now." The Reverend checked. "There's a ship leaving Pearl Harbor next week that stops at Yokohama. From there, you can reach Nagasaki." Aiko stared at the envelope, then at Isaiah's face. Understanding dawned in her eyes. "Your medal," she whispered. "You sell your medal." Isaiah looked down at the table. It was just metal. Some things matter more. Aiko reached across the table, her cool fingers touching his cheek, turning his face toward hers. Tears shimmered in her dark eyes. "Why you do this?" The answer came simply, from a place deep within his heart. "Because I care what happens to you, to Kenji, because—" He hesitated, then finished softly. "Because that's what family does." The next morning, they began preparations for her journey. Isaiah mended her traveling bag while Aiko carefully packed the medicines they'd been able to obtain. She wrapped her extra dress in a cloth bundle, along with the photograph of Kenji and a small bag of rice. "Travel light," Isaiah advised. "Safer that way." The Reverend arrived to help with arrangements, bringing official papers Aiko would need. "The mission in Yokohama will meet your ship," he explained. "They'll help you get to Nagasaki." The days passed too quickly. Each sunset brought them closer to parting. They worked side by side, speaking little, but communicating through glances, through the familiar rhythm of shared tasks. At night, Isaiah would hear Aiko's quiet prayers in Japanese, her voice carrying through the darkness. On the last evening before her departure, Isaiah found Aiko sitting on the porch steps, watching the sun sink below the cane fields. He sat beside her, the space between them small but significant. From his pocket, he took the bronze star ribbon, the one thing he had kept when selling the medal. The deep red silk with thin white stripes gleamed in the fading light. "I want you to have this," he said, pressing it into her palm. "For luck. For remembering." Aiko looked down at the ribbon, then carefully folded it and tucked it inside her sleeve, next to her heart. "I not forget," she promised. "Never forget." The morning of her departure dawned clear and beautiful. Birds sang in the palm trees as if nothing were changing. Isaiah helped Aiko into the wagon, passing up her small bundle of belongings. The Reverend waited in the driver's seat, his face somber. Buddy whined, sensing something was wrong. Aiko knelt to stroke the dog's head one last time. "Watch Isaiah," she told the animal. "Be good dog." At the harbor, ships loomed large against the blue sky, smokestacks belching dark clouds as they prepared to depart. Sailors and dock workers bustled about, paying little attention to the small group making their way to the passenger vessel bound for Japan. At the gangplank, Isaiah handed Aiko the ticket he'd purchased. His throat felt too tight for words. "How did you say goodbye to someone who had become the center of your world?" Aiko stood before him, clutching her bundle, looking suddenly small against the massive ship. The wind from the sea lifted strands of her dark hair, blowing them across her face. She tucked them back with a familiar gesture that made Isaiah's heart ache. He reached for her hand, lifting it to his heart in a gesture she had taught him, a Japanese sign of deep respect and affection. "Come back," he said simply. "Come back to where you found peace." Aiko's eyes filled with tears. "I try," she whispered. "For Kenji. For you." The ship's whistle blew, a shrill reminder that time had run out. With a last look, Aiko turned and walked up the gangplank, her slight figure soon lost among the other passengers. Isaiah stood on the dock long after the ship had disappeared over the horizon, the emptiness inside him as vast as the ocean that now separated them. The days after Aiko's departure stretched endlessly. Isaiah threw himself into work, rising before dawn and collapsing into exhausted sleep each night. He took extra shifts at Johnson's garage, repairing engines and hauling scrap metal until his muscles burned with fatigue. In the evenings, he tended the farm alone, feeding the chickens, weeding the garden, harvesting vegetables. Buddy followed him everywhere, as if sensing his need for companionship. "Just you and me now, boy," Isaiah would say, scratching behind the dog's mismatched ears. Summer faded into fall. The sugarcane grew tall, its green stalks topped with feathery purple tassels that waved in the breeze. Isaiah kept Aiko's garden flourishing, carefully tending the herbs she had planted for healing. No letters came. Isaiah tried not to worry, telling himself that mail from Japan was slow and unreliable. The Reverend assured him that the mission network would send word if anything went badly wrong. "No news is good news," Miriam Hale said when she visited, bringing a freshly baked loaf of bread. But her eyes held the same concern that gnawed at Isaiah's heart. On Sundays, Isaiah attended church with the Hales, drawing comfort from the familiar hymns and scriptures. Afterward, he often stayed to teach Bible stories to the village children. His deep voice and gentle manner made him a favorite with the little ones, who no longer stared at his dark skin or whispered behind their hands. "Mr. Isaiah," a small girl asked one day, "where's the Japanese lady, the one who made pretty birds on cloth?" "She had to go help her little boy," Isaiah explained. "He was sick and needed his mama. Will she come back?" The child persisted. Isaiah looked towards the ocean, visible through the church windows. "I pray so," he answered honestly. "Every day." In October, Isaiah finished rebuilding the farmhouse bedroom. He made a new bed frame from island hardwood, sanded smooth and polished to a rich glow. Above it, he hung one of Aiko's embroidered cloths, a scene of birds flying over mountains. "A man's got to have hope," he told Buddy, who watched from the doorway as Isaiah stepped back to survey his work. "She'll need a proper place when she returns." As the weeks passed without word, Isaiah built a small cross on the hillside overlooking the sea. Each evening at sunset, he would climb up and sit beside it, offering prayers for Aiko and Kenji. Sometimes he played his harmonica, the mournful notes drifting over the water as if they could somehow reach across the vast Pacific. "Lord," he would whisper, "keep her safe, keep them both safe, and if it be your will, bring them home." In November, a fierce storm blew in from the sea. Isaiah stood on the porch, watching lightning split the sky above churning waves. The wind howled around the house, but the repaired roof held firm. Faith House stood strong against the storm, just as he tried to do. The next morning, Isaiah found damage to the chicken coop roof. As he repaired it, he realized he was speaking aloud to Aiko as if she were there beside him. "Need to reinforce this corner better. What do you think? Maybe another support beam here?" He paused, hammer in midair, suddenly aware of the silence that answered him. Buddy whined softly at his feet. "I know, boy," Isaiah sighed, patting the dog's head. "I miss her too." Thanksgiving came, bringing an invitation to dinner with the Hales. The church community gathered, tables loaded with food. Isaiah brought sweet potatoes from Aiko's garden and a jar of honey from the bees he'd started keeping. "Any word?" Reverend Hale asked quietly as they stood apart from the others. Isaiah shook his head. "Nothing yet." The old man placed a weathered hand on his shoulder. "Faith, son, remember the name you gave your home?" "I'm trying," Isaiah said. "Some days are harder than others." December arrived with cool breezes and holiday preparations. Isaiah hung simple decorations, pine boughs and red berries, as Aiko had admired in pictures from American magazines. On Christmas Eve, he attended the candlelight service at church, the glow of hundreds of flames reminding him of stars. As the new year of 1947 began, Isaiah planted new fields, his actions a testimony to hope. Life would continue, he would continue, and maybe, just maybe, she would return. In late January, he received a brief note through the mission network. Both alive, conditions difficult, continuing treatment. The few words were like water to parched soil. They lived. It was enough for now. Winter gave way to spring. Cherry trees blossomed in village gardens, reminding Isaiah painfully of Aiko's faded kimono when he'd first seen her, at the camp. Had it really been less than 2 years ago? It seemed like another lifetime. One evening in late March, Isaiah sat beside the cross on the hill, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. Buddy lay beside him, head on paws, eyes half closed. The dog's ear suddenly perked up, and he raised his head, looking towards the road. "What is it, boy?" Isaiah asked, following the dog's gaze. In the distance, a vehicle approached, the Reverend's truck, moving faster than usual, dust billowing behind it. Isaiah's heart quickened. News at last? He stood, shading his eyes against the setting sun as the truck pulled up to the farm. The Reverend leaned out the window, waving urgently. "Isaiah! The harbour master called. There's a steamer docking early tomorrow morning from Japan. The passenger list—" He paused, eyes bright with emotion. "The passenger list includes an Aiko Carter and child!" The world seemed to stop. Isaiah gripped the wooden cross for support as his knees weakened. "Tomorrow?" he whispered. "She's coming home tomorrow?" "If the seas are fair." The Reverend confirmed. First light. That night, Isaiah couldn't sleep. He paced the house, straightening already neat rooms, checking and rechecking the bedroom he'd prepared. Would she find it welcoming? Would Kenji like the small cot he'd placed nearby? Would they stay? 1,000 questions churned in his mind, but above them all hovered one certainty. They were coming. After months of silence and waiting, they were coming home. As dawn broke, Isaiah stood on the dock, scanning the horizon for the ship. Buddy sat at his feet, tail thumping against the wooden planks. The dog seemed to understand the importance of this day. Then Isaiah saw it, a steamer approaching the harbour, dark smoke trailing from its stack. His heart hammered against his ribs as the vessel drew closer, finally docking with a blast of its horn. Passengers began disembarking. Sailors, businessmen, a few military personnel. Isaiah strained to see past them, searching for Aiko's slender figure among the crowd. And then, there she was. Thinner than he remembered, her face pale but radiant. She stepped carefully down the gangplank, one hand holding a small bundle, the other clasping the hand of a boy, a solemn-faced child with serious eyes that matched his mother's. Kenji. Isaiah stood frozen, suddenly afraid. What if she had changed her mind? What if Japan had reclaimed her heart? What if the boy feared him? But then Aiko looked up, her eyes finding his across the crowd. A smile bloomed on her face, transforming it. She leaned down to whisper something to Kenji, pointing toward Isaiah. The boy looked uncertain, hiding partially behind his mother's skirt. Isaiah understood his fear. He was a stranger, a large man with dark skin, different from anyone the child had known. Isaiah dropped to one knee, bringing himself to the boy's level. He waited, making no sudden movements, letting Aiko and Kenji approach at their own pace. When they reached him, Aiko spoke softly in Japanese to her son, then turned to Isaiah, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "We are home," she whispered. Isaiah's heart swelled with a joy too great for words. He reached out slowly, taking her free hand in his. And in that moment, on a sunlit dock with the scent of salt air around them, Isaiah Carter knew he had received the greatest blessing a man could hope for. "Welcome home," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Welcome home." Isaiah knelt on the dock, looking into the serious face of the small boy hiding behind Aiko's skirt. Kenji was thin, too thin, with shadows under his eyes that no child should have. But he stood straight, his gaze direct and questioning. "Kenji?" Isaiah said softly. "I'm Isaiah." He touched his chest. "Isaiah." The boy looked up at his mother. Aiko nodded encouragingly and said something in Japanese. Kenji stepped forward slightly, still holding his mother's hand. "Isaiah," he repeated carefully, the name strange on his tongue. "That's right." Isaiah smiled. "It's good to meet you, Kenji." Buddy, who had been sitting patiently, suddenly stood and wagged his tail. Kenji's eyes widened at the sight of the dog. "Inu?" he asked his mother. "Yes, dog," Aiko confirmed. "Buddy, good dog." Cautiously, Kenji extended his hand. Buddy sniffed it gently, then licked his fingers. A small smile, the first Isaiah had seen, touched the boy's face. Reverend Hale approached with his truck to drive them home. As they loaded the few belongings Aiko and Kenji had brought, a small wooden chest, 2 fabric bundles, and a paper package tied with string, Isaiah noticed how tired they both looked. "The journey was long?" he asked Aiko as he helped her into the truck. She nodded. "Many days on ship. Kenji sick much of time." She looked at her son with worried eyes. "Need rest, good food. We have both waiting at home," Isaiah assured her. The drive back to the farm passed in a strange mix of comfortable silence and awkward pauses. Isaiah had imagined this moment for months, all the things he would say, the questions he would ask. Now that Aiko was actually beside him, words seemed inadequate. Kenji sat between them on the bench seat, looking out the window with wide eyes at the passing landscape. The island must seem so different from Japan. The swaying palms, the fields of sugarcane, the brilliant blue ocean visible beyond green hills. "Big water," the boy said suddenly, pointing towards the sea. "Yes," Isaiah agreed. "Big water all around us. We live on an island." Kenji nodded, processing this information with a seriousness that reminded Isaiah of Aiko. As they approached the farm, Isaiah felt a sudden nervousness. Would Aiko find it changed? Would she be disappointed by the modest improvements he'd made? "I fixed up the house," he said, gesturing ahead as Faith House came into view. "Repaired the bedroom. Made a small bed for Kenji, too." Aiko's eyes softened as she took in the neat white house with its blue shutters, the flourishing garden, the chicken coop with hens pecking in the yard. "Beautiful," she said softly. "More beautiful than I remember." Relief washed over Isaiah. "It's been waiting for you," he said simply. "We all have." When they pulled up to the house, Miriam Hale was waiting on the porch. She rushed forward to embrace Aiko, then knelt to greet Kenji. "Welcome, little one," she said warmly. "We've been praying for you." Kenji bowed politely, a gesture that brought tears to Miriam's eyes. She quickly wiped them away and gestured toward the house. "I've prepared lunch. You must be hungry after your journey." Inside, the table was set with a feast: roast chicken, sweet potatoes, fresh bread, and a bowl of tropical fruits. Kenji's eyes grew round at the sight. "Eat slowly," Aiko cautioned him in Japanese as she helped him wash his hands. "Your stomach is not used to such food." They gathered around the table. Reverend Hale bowed his head to offer thanks, his weathered hands clasping Aiko's and Kenji's. "Lord, We thank you for safe journeys and joyful homecomings. We thank you for bringing this family together again, across oceans and hardships. Bless this food to our bodies and us to your service. Amen. Amen, Isaiah and Miriam echoed. Amen, Aiko repeated softly, and nudged Kenji to do the same. As they ate, Kenji gradually relaxed, his eyes moving curiously around the kitchen. He pointed to objects, looking to his mother for the English words. Table, Aiko told him. Cup, Isaiah added. Bread, Miriam offered. With each new word, Kenji nodded solemnly, committing it to memory. After lunch, while the Reverend and Miriam washed dishes, Isaiah showed Aiko and Kenji the rest of the house. He led them to the bedroom he had prepared, watching anxiously for their reaction. The room was simple, but welcoming. Fresh whitewash on the walls, curtains at the windows, the hardwood bed frame polished to a warm glow. Beside it stood a smaller bed for Kenji, covered with a colorful quilt Miriam had made. This is where you'll sleep, Isaiah explained, gesturing to the beds. I can stay in the barn if— No, Aiko interrupted gently. Families stay together. She looked at the embroidered cloth hanging above the bed, the one she had made with birds flying over mountains, and her eyes filled with tears. You keep it. Of course, Isaiah said. It reminded me of you, of hope. Kenji moved around the room, touching things curiously. The smooth wood of the bed frame, the soft quilt, the small table by the window. He looked up at his mother and asked a question in Japanese. He asked if this really our home now. Aiko translated, her voice uncertain. If we stay here. Isaiah knelt again to meet Kenji's eyes. Yes, he said firmly, looking from the boy to Aiko. This is your home, for as long as you want it to be. That evening, after the Hales had gone, Isaiah sat on the porch with Aiko, watching as Kenji explored the yard with Buddy trotting behind him. The boy moved cautiously but with growing confidence, pointing at chickens and flowers, practicing his new English words. He learns fast, Isaiah observed. Aiko nodded. Smart boy. In Japan, school destroyed. No books. She sighed. Many children die. Kenji very sick when I arrive. But he's better now. Better, yes. Doctor say— She searched for the words. Say radiation sickness less. Good chance for normal life. She looked at Isaiah, her eyes serious. Thank you. For medal. For money. You save him. Isaiah shook his head. You saved him, Aiko. A mother's love is powerful medicine. As dusk fell, they called Kenji inside. Isaiah showed him how to pump water for washing and helped him unpack his few possessions, a wooden top, a small book with Japanese writing, and a stone shaped like a fish. Treasure, Kenji explained solemnly, placing the stone on the windowsill. That night, after Kenji had fallen asleep, exhausted from the day's events, Isaiah and Aiko sat at the kitchen table, a lantern casting warm light between them. I want to hear everything, Isaiah said, when you're ready to tell it. Slowly, in her improved but still halting English, Aiko told him about her journey, the difficult sea crossing, the devastation she found in Japan, cities reduced to rubble, people living in makeshift shelters, food scarce. Nagasaki? She shook her head, unable to find words for what she had seen. She described finding Kenji in a mission hospital, thin as a ghost, his eyes huge in his pale face. His grandmother had died just weeks before Aiko arrived. The medicine Isaiah had sent earlier had helped keep him alive until she could reach him. Doctor say miracle he survive. Aiko said softly. I tell doctor, not miracle. Faith. She touched the pocket where she kept Isaiah's medal ribbon. Every day I tell Kenji about farm, about ocean, About man named Isaiah who helped us come home. Isaiah reached across the table, taking her hand in his. You could have stayed in Japan, rebuilt there. Aiko shook her head firmly. Japan now full of ghosts, too many memories. She squeezed his hand. Here is peace, here is hope. She paused, looking into his eyes. Here is home. In that moment, something that had been growing between them for months, through shared work, shared struggles, and shared dreams, bloomed fully in Isaiah's heart. This was no longer a marriage of convenience or obligation. This was a choice, a family forged in hardship and strengthened by separation. I'm glad you came back, he whispered. I promise I come back, Aiko reminded him, a small smile touching her lips. I keep promise. Spring brought mild days and gentle rains. The land seemed to celebrate with explosions of color, hibiscus blooming in brilliant reds and oranges, plumeria releasing its sweet scent on the breeze, wild ginger adding splashes of pink to the forest edges. Kenji flourished in his new home. The thin, solemn boy gradually filled out, his cheeks rounding, his eyes brightening. He followed Isaiah everywhere, watching intently as he repaired fences or tended the fields, then attempting to help with his small hands. Like this? Kenji would ask, mimicking Isaiah's movements with the hoe or hammer. Just like that, Isaiah would confirm, marveling at how quickly the boy learned. By April, Kenji's English had improved dramatically. He attended the small village school 3 days a week, where the teacher, Miss Collins, reported that he was a dedicated student with a gift for mathematics. Numbers same in all languages, Kenji explained when Isaiah praised his schoolwork. Aiko too seemed to blossom. Her cough had lessened in the clean island air, and her strength returned as she worked in the garden and tended her growing flock of chickens. Her embroidery business expanded, with orders coming from as far as Honolulu for her delicate work. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching Kenji chase fireflies with Buddy, Isaiah felt a deep contentment settle in his chest. This was what he had dreamed of during those long months of waiting, the three of them together, building a life on this land. Aiko, he said softly, there's something I've been thinking about. She turned toward him, her face glowing in the golden light of sunset. Yes? Our marriage. He paused, searching for the right words. It didn't start the way most do. We had no choice then. Aiko nodded, her expression growing serious. But now we do have a choice. Isaiah continued. And I choose you. I choose our family. He took her hand gently. I was wondering if you might want to marry me again. Properly this time. By choice, not by order. Aiko's eyes widened. For a moment she was silent, and Isaiah feared he had misunderstood the feelings growing between them. Then a smile broke across her face like sunrise. Yes, she said simply. I choose you too. The seaside chapel had been rebuilt after the flood, its white walls gleaming in the morning sun, windows open to catch the ocean breeze. On a Saturday in May, it filled with people from the village, farmers and shopkeepers, school children and their parents, all gathering to witness something few had thought possible. Reverend Hale, still thin but standing tall at the altar, beamed as Isaiah took his place at the front of the church. Isaiah wore his best shirt, pressed smooth by Miriam's careful hands, and a borrowed tie that Kenji had helped him knot that morning. The small choir began to sing as Aiko appeared at the chapel door. She wore a simple white dress with blue embroidery at the collar and sleeves, work of her own hands. Her dark hair was adorned with a crown of plumeria blossoms, but what everyone noticed most was her radiant smile as she walked down the aisle. Beside her walked Kenji, solemn in his role as escort, a small cushion in his hands bearing 2 simple gold bands, purchased with money from their harvest and Aiko's embroidery. When they reached the altar, Kenji took his place beside Isaiah, standing straight and proud. Aiko stepped forward, taking Isaiah's outstretched hands. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Hale began, his voice strong despite his age, "we gather today to witness Isaiah and Aiko as they renew their vows, this time freely given, with full hearts and clear understanding." As Isaiah looked into Aiko's eyes, the chapel and guests seemed to fade away. He remembered the frightened woman in the tattered kimono at the POW camp, the quiet strength she had shown through flood and separation, the courage it had taken to return to him, to choose this life they were building together. When the time came for vows, he spoke from his heart. "Aiko, I take you as my wife, not because anyone ordered it, but because I love you. I promise to stand by you through good harvests and bad, through sunshine and storms, to help you raise Kenji in faith and hope, to build a home where love has no borders." Tears glistened in Aiko's eyes as she responded, her English clear and confident. "Isaiah, I take you as my husband, by my choice, with my whole heart. I promise to work beside you, to share your joys and sorrows, to teach our son the meaning of courage." She smiled, to show the world that love needs no translation. They exchanged rings, simple bands that symbolized a bond far stronger than metal. When Reverend Hale pronounced them husband and wife, Isaiah gently lifted Aiko's face to his and kissed her for the first time, a tender promise of all the days to come. As they turned to face the congregation, Isaiah was startled to see tears on the faces of those who had once whispered behind their backs. Mrs. Wilson, whose baby Aiko had delivered, dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Mr. Johnson from the garage nodded respectfully. Even the shopkeeper who had once refused to serve them stood and applauded. The choir began to sing "Amazing Grace," the familiar hymn filling the chapel with its message of redemption and hope. Isaiah felt Kenji slip his small hand into his larger one. The 3 of them walked down the aisle together, not as strangers bound by circumstance, but as a family united by choice. Outside, the ocean stretched blue and endless beyond the chapel, waves breaking gently on the shore. Sunlight danced on the water, and a warm breeze carried the scent of plumeria and salt. Isaiah looked down at Aiko, her face lifted to his, tears shimmering in her dark eyes. "No more fear," he whispered, echoing the promise he had made in his heart long ago. Aiko smiled, understanding all he meant. "No more fear," she agreed. "Only love." 1 year later, the old flooded field that Isaiah and Aiko had begun to clear before their separation had transformed into a thriving plantation of sugarcane. They had named it Grace Fields, a reminder of the unexpected blessing that had brought them together and the faith that had sustained them through separation and hardship. The morning sun filtered through the leaves as Isaiah walked between the tall stalks, checking their progress. The sweet scent of ripening cane hung in the humid air. Harvest would come soon, bringing the reward of months of labor. Buddy trotted at his heels, older now but still alert, ears perked for any sound from the underbrush. From beyond the field came the distant chatter of children. Kenji and his friends from the village playing near the stream that had once destroyed their home and now nourished their crops. At 8 years old, Kenji had grown strong and confident. No one watching him race along the shore or climb trees with the other children would guess the sickness he had overcome. He excelled in school, often helping younger children with their lessons. The village had embraced him completely, his difference becoming simply another thread in the island's diverse fabric. "Papa!" Kenji's voice carried across the field as he ran toward Isaiah, waving excitedly. Though not his son by birth, Kenji had begun calling Isaiah Papa shortly after the wedding, a gift more precious than any harvest. "What is it, son?" Isaiah asked, smiling at the boy's enthusiasm. "Teacher says I can help with the younger students, like a real teacher." Kenji's face shone with pride as he caught his breath. "And Mama says to tell you lunch is ready." "Well, we better not keep her waiting then," Isaiah said, ruffling the boy's dark hair. "Race you to the house?" They ran together through the cane field, Buddy barking joyfully as he tried to keep pace. The white farmhouse came into view, smoke rising from the kitchen chimney. On the porch stood Aiko, one hand shading her eyes as she watched for them, the other resting gently on the slight swell of her belly. Their child would come with the winter rains, a brother or sister for Kenji, another blessing neither had dared to hope for. The doctor in Honolulu had assured them that Aiko's health was strong enough now that the radiation sickness had not affected her ability to bear children. "You two look like you've been rolling in the fields." Aiko laughed as they approached, brushing dirt from Kenji's cheek. Her English was nearly perfect now, though she still taught Kenji Japanese so he would remember his heritage. "Just checking the cane," Isaiah explained, washing his hands at the outdoor pump. "It's almost ready. Should be our best harvest yet." Inside, the kitchen was warm and fragrant with the smell of fish stew and fresh bread. Photographs lined the walls. Kenji's school portrait, Isaiah and Aiko's wedding day, the three of them standing proudly before their first harvest. A family history being written day by day. After lunch, while Kenji returned to school, Isaiah and Aiko walked together to the small building near the edge of the property. Once a storage shed, it had been transformed into a classroom where Aiko now taught English to Japanese immigrants and Japanese to interested islanders. "How many students today?" Isaiah asked as they approached. 6, Aiko replied, "including Mrs. Wilson. She wants to learn Japanese to help with the new fishing crews arriving next month." Isaiah marveled at how things had changed. The same woman who had once feared Aiko now sought her knowledge, her friendship. "I'll pick up those books you ordered while I'm in town," he promised, stopping at the classroom door. "And more thread for your embroidery." Aiko reached up to straighten his collar, a gesture of affection that had become familiar over their years together. "Don't forget to check on Reverend Hale. Miriam said his cough returned yesterday." "I'll bring him some of that honey tea you made. Never fails to help." As Isaiah turned to go, Aiko caught his hand. "Isaiah." "Yes?" Her eyes were soft with an emotion that still caught his breath sometimes. "I am happy. Every day I am happy." He squeezed her hand gently. "Me too, Aiko. More than I ever thought possible." That Sunday, as had become their tradition, the family gathered under the banyan tree after church services. Isaiah read from the Bible, his deep voice carrying on the warm breeze. Kenji listened attentively, sometimes asking questions that showed wisdom beyond his years. "And now abideth faith, hope, love, these three." Isaiah read from Corinthians, "But the greatest of these is love." "Why is love the greatest?" Kenji asked, looking up from where he sat cross-legged on the grass. Isaiah glanced at Aiko, her face serene as she worked on a small embroidery. Tiny clothes for the child to come. "Because love changes things," he explained. "It changes people. It makes us better than we were." "Like how you and Mama changed the village?" Kenji asked. "People don't stare at us anymore." "That's right." Isaiah nodded. "Love takes time. It takes work. Like our fields, you have to plant the seeds, tend them through storms, be patient until harvest. And sometimes," Aiko added softly, "love grows in the places you least expect, like a flower pushing through concrete." As afternoon stretched toward evening, neighbors began to arrive for the weekly gathering that had become a village tradition. They brought food and instruments, spreading blankets on the grass near the banyan tree. Children played tag while adults exchanged news and shared the week's burdens and joys. Mr. Wilson brought his fiddle, and soon music filled the air. Isaiah took out his harmonica, joining in with the familiar hymns and folk songs. Aiko's clear voice rose above the others as she sang, no longer afraid, no longer a stranger in a foreign land. Kenji ran among the other children, his laughter blending with theirs in the golden light. No one watching would see him as different. He was simply one of them, accepted and loved. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across Grace Fields, the gathered families fell silent to watch nature's daily miracle. The sky painted itself in brilliant orange and pink, the ocean reflecting the glory above. Isaiah stood at the edge of his land, Aiko beside him, her hand in his. Behind them, their community, once divided, now united. Before them, fields of sugarcane swaying gently in the evening breeze, proof that what is planted in hardship can yield the sweetest harvest. "Look," Kenji whispered, pointing toward the horizon where sea met sky. A flock of birds flew in perfect formation against the sunset, their wings catching the last golden light. They looked exactly like the birds Aiko had embroidered on the cloth that hung above their bed, a vision of freedom and hope made real. In that moment, as day gave way to dusk and the first stars appeared above Grace Fields, they stood together, not as people separated by war, race, or circumstance, but as a family, living proof that love, sown in the most unlikely soil, could take root and flourish, outgrowing the boundaries that humans create and reaching toward heaven's endless possibilities. The end.